Marjorie Holcomb spent 50 years inside a marriage that looked from the outside like the life other women envied. A house on the right street in Westport, Connecticut. A husband who called her "My Margie" at dinner parties, the way you might introduce a piece of well-kept furniture. On a Tuesday morning in late September, a folder fell off her husband Russell's desk, and the bank statements that spilled across the rug told her in cold accounting language that he had been keeping a second family in Greenwich for 22 years. She didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't change her face. She filed for divorce, packed 2 suitcases, and drove 7 hours north into Otsego County, New York, where her father had left her a dairy farm she had not seen in 30 years. And a rotting barn so far gone the county assessor had marked it for demolition. She expected dust and ghosts. What she found behind the back wall of that barn brought her to her knees on the cold dirt floor and proved that the man she had just divorced had spent 2 decades trying to take the one thing her father had made certain he could never reach. You will not believe what Margie found behind that loose cedar plank in the back of the Vent family barn. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And as to what word you were an end. The office had always been Russell's room. This was one of those arrangements in their marriage that had calcified so far back in the timeline that Margie had stopped seeing it. The kitchen was hers. The garden was hers. The bedroom belonged to both of them, though when she thought about it honestly, even the bedroom had been arranged around what time he liked to wake up, what side of the bed he preferred, what temperature he wanted the thermostat held at through the night. The office, though, was his alone. She knocked before entering. The drawers of his oak desk stayed closed. The locked filing cabinet in the corner stayed locked. She had been observing these boundaries for so many decades that she no longer remembered observing them. They had become invisible to her, like the wallpaper in the upstairs hall they had bought in 1994 and never noticed again. On the Tuesday morning that everything changed, she went into the office because the kitchen smelled like something burning, and she was walking each room to find the source. The smell turned out to be a slice of sourdough she had forgotten in the toaster. On her way back through the office, the cuff of her cardigan caught the corner of a manila folder sitting at the far edge of Russell's desk. The folder slid. The papers inside fanned out across the rug. She stood looking at what had fallen. Bank statements. She knew bank statements. She had been managing the household accounts for 50 years and could read a statement the way a nurse reads vitals. These were not from any account she recognized. The bank was unfamiliar. The account number meant nothing to her. The balance was the kind of balance that made her sit down on the edge of his desk chair before she had thought about whether she meant to sit down. The transaction history took her about 4 minutes to understand. A monthly tuition payment to a private school in Greenwich she had never heard of. An automated rent payment to an apartment on Sound Beach Avenue. Charges at a pediatrician's office, charges at a women's clothing store, a grocery store in a town she had been to maybe twice in her life, a children's bookstore, 12 children's birthday parties paid for in 12 different Septembers. She turned the page. 22 years. She put the statements back into the folder in the order they had fallen out. She arranged the folder at the same angle on the desk, the way her sleeve had originally caught it as close as memory allowed. She wiped the desk with the dry edge of her cardigan to lift any trace of where her hand had pressed. She closed the office door behind her and went back to the kitchen, unplugged the toaster, and stood at the sink with both hands flat on the granite, looking out at the back hedge that had marked the boundary of her life for half a century. Her hands weren't shaking. She noticed this. She noticed it the way you notice that a clock has stopped with a small click of attention. The body, when something this large arrives, sometimes skips the trembling and goes directly to the work of rearrangement. She was already rearranging. She could feel it happening behind her eyes. 22 years ago, their daughter Camille had left for Vassar. Russell had begun what he called a phase of expanded responsibilities at the firm. Trips to client offices, some weeks twice. She had not questioned any of it because nothing in 50 years had given her permission to question him, and because she had loved him. She thought about her father. Wendell Went had been a man of few unnecessary words and a clean instinct for character. He had never once said anything against Russell. He had never raised a complaint she could have repeated. But 7 months before he died of pneumonia in the winter of 1994, he had altered his will through his own attorney without telling anyone. He left the dairy farm in Otsego County, the 110 acres her grandfather had bought in 1923, The farmhouse, the orchard, the rotting back barn, all of it to Marjay alone. Sole heir. Marjorie Ann Went Holcomb. No other names on the title, no shared ownership. She had assumed at the time that it was a procedural tidying by a careful man. She walked to the bedroom and opened the small writing desk by the window, the one piece of furniture in the house Russell had never claimed. She found the folder labeled Father's Estate. She read the will twice. The property transfer document was clean and unambiguous. Attached to it was her father's handwritten note, which she had read once in 1994 and never returned to. The note said, in his slanted, careful handwriting, only this: Marjay, this is yours. Keep it that way. She sat down on the edge of the bed. He had known something. He had known it without proof, or with proof he had chosen not to give her. And rather than say it and risk her not believing him, he had made certain that the one thing he could lock down stayed locked down. That was her father, the man who fixed the leak before he mentioned the rain. She found Naomi Quinn's card in the back of her address book, in the section labeled Miscellaneous, where it had been filed 12 years earlier after Naomi handled a small easement matter on the farm. She left a voicemail asking for the earliest appointment available. Then she washed her face with cold water and went down to the kitchen to start dinner, because Russell would be home at 6:30, and her face needed to look like the face of a woman who had spent her day the way she had spent every other day for half a century. He walked through the front door at 6:28. He kissed the top of her head, hung his jacket on the chair, asked what smelled so good, and poured himself a glass of the Malbec he liked. They ate the roast chicken. They talked about the neighbor's beagle and the weather forecast for the weekend. She watched him across the table and saw, for the first time in 50 years, the man she was actually looking at. She slept beside him that night without saying any of what she knew. She didn't have everything yet. She would not move until she had everything. Naomi Quinn's office called back the next morning at 9:10. The earliest appointment was Thursday at 11. That gave Marjay 2 days, and she used them the way her grandmother had taught her to use cold mornings on a dairy farm. With method, without rush, and with no wasted movement. She made a list at the kitchen table. She wrote down what she had seen on the bank statements, the dates she could remember, the account number, the routing number, the name of the school in Greenwich. She wrote it in her own careful handwriting on a yellow legal pad. Then she slid the legal pad inside the cookbook where she kept her grocery receipts, a place Russell had never opened in 50 years and was unlikely to open now. On Wednesday morning, after Russell left for the train, she went into the office and photographed every page in the manila folder. She used the small camera on her phone, the one Camille had set up for her 3 Christmases ago. She took the photographs in the natural light from the window, kept her hand steady, made sure each page was readable. She put the folder back at the same angle it had been resting at and wiped the corner of the desk where her sleeve had touched. Then she opened the second drawer of his desk. She had never opened any drawer of Russell's desk. The act of doing it now did not feel like trespass. The trespass had been done to her over a long time, and what she was doing was a small, clean motion of accounting that would not have been necessary if the larger trespass had not been undertaken. She found the small brass key for the filing cabinet inside a tin of paper clips at the back of the drawer. The cabinet held 4 drawers of files, organized by year. She started at the back. She was looking for anything related to her father's farm. She found it in the bottom drawer, in a green hanging folder marked Went Holcomb, Property Matters in Russell's tight printing. The folder held a stack of documents thick enough that she had to sit down on the office floor to spread them across the rug. The first document was a quitclaim deed dated 2009. The deed transferred the Went farm from Marjorie Ann Went Holcomb to a Delaware holding company called Cherry Valley Acquisitions, LLC. Her signature was at the bottom. She had never signed a quitclaim deed in her life. She had never heard of Cherry Valley Acquisitions. The signature was a careful forgery, close enough to fool a hurried notary, off enough that her own eye could see the wrong slant of the M. The second document was another forged deed, dated 2014, for an adjacent 40 acres she had not known her father had bought. She read that one twice. There was no mention of any 40 acres in her father's will. The document called it Went Parcel 2, and it had her forged signature on it as well. The third document was a letter on heavy stationery from a real estate group called Kettle Ridge Holdings, addressed to Russell, dated 2018. The letter described what it called preliminary site planning for a luxury equestrian community in Otsego County. It referenced 110 acres plus an adjacent 40-acre parcel as the core acquisition target. And it referenced a post-development valuation Marge had to read 3 times before her eyes could process the number of zeros. The letter closed by asking Russell to confirm a timeline for clear title, since their investor partners were ready to proceed once the property was free of complications. She photographed everything. She put it all back in the green folder in the order she had found it, locked the cabinet, returned the brass key to the tin of paper clips, and slid the drawer shut. She washed her hands at the kitchen sink because the inside of the bottom drawer had been dusty and her fingers needed clean water on them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Naomi Quinn was 61 and sat behind a clean desk in a small office on Post Road, the kind of attorney whose practice had narrowed over the years to the cases she found worth the effort. She listened to Marge the way a good doctor listens, taking notes by hand, asking only what she needed to ask. When Marge finished, Naomi was quiet for a beat. "You are certain that signature on the 2009 deed is not yours?" "I have never signed any document related to my father's farm. No one has ever asked me to." Naomi turned the photograph on her phone screen toward the desk light. "This is not a passable forgery to a forensic eye. To a tired notary in 2009, it would have moved through. The deed was filed in Otsego County. We can pull the record. And the second one, the 40 acres I did not know about. That one we will trace. If your father bought a parcel and recorded the title without telling anyone, there is a paper trail. We can find it." Marge nodded. Naomi set the phone down and folded her hands. "Mrs. Holcomb, I want you to be clear about what we are looking at. Forged signatures on property deeds are felony fraud. Combined with concealed accounts and 22 years of diverted household funds, you have a serious matter. It will take time. Are you prepared for that?" "I have waited 50 years. I can wait a few more months." She filed for divorce on Monday morning. She did not warn Russell. She did not soften the landing. She had given him every soft landing for half a century, and he had used each one as a step toward the next room he wanted to take from her. The papers were served at his office on Wednesday at 10 a.m., a time chosen so she would not be in the house when he opened them. She wanted to be elsewhere, doing something with her hands, when the news arrived where she was no longer planning to be. She was in the kitchen packing 2 suitcases, clothes for 2 weeks, which could extend, the wooden box of family photographs from the top shelf of the linen closet, the folder with her personal papers, her mother Beatrice's silver hairbrush, her father's note about the farm. She left the dishes, the curtains she had hung in 1989, the wedding china, the silver service from his mother. She left her wedding ring in the small porcelain dish on the marble counter where she had set her keys every evening for half a century. She drove the Volvo out of the driveway at 11:15 and pointed it north toward Otsego County, and she did not look in the rearview mirror once. The drive took 7 hours instead of the 6 she had planned. There was construction outside Hartford, and she stopped twice, once for gas in Kingston and once for a coffee at a service plaza off the New York Thruway, where she sat in the car for 15 minutes with both hands wrapped around the cup, watching the trees on the far side of the parking lot move in a wind that was already cooler than the wind in Westport had been that morning. She had not been back to Otsego County in 30 years. She had told herself across those 30 years that there was always a reason. The drive was long. The house had been closed up. Russell did not like the country, and what was the point of going alone? And there was always something the next month that needed her in Westport. She had accepted these reasons one at a time, the way you accept small weather. Sitting in the Service Plaza parking lot with a paper cup of bad coffee, she understood that the reasons had been arranged for her. Russell had wanted her away from the farm because the farm was the one thing he could not get to as long as she stayed away from it, ignorant of what it was worth and uninterested in claiming it. Her absence had been useful to him. He had managed her absence the same way he had managed everything else. The highway gave way to a state road, and the state road gave way to a county route with no name on the sign, just a number. And she found the turn from memory, the way you find a song you have not sung since childhood, the words arriving a beat before you need them. The mountains came up to the west. The leaves had started to turn, that specific upstate New York color that was halfway between rust and gold, and only happened for about 10 days in late September. She had forgotten this color. The forgetting felt like a room she had locked, and the remembering felt like opening the door and finding the furniture still inside. She turned onto the gravel track that led down to the farm and parked under the same red oak her father had always parked under, beside a fence post so weathered it looked more like driftwood than wood. She sat in the Volvo for a long time before she got out. The farmhouse was standing. She had been afraid the whole drive up that it would not be. A house left empty for 30 years can rot in many directions. The roof can give. A pipe can burst in a January she did not know about and bring down a ceiling. Animals can move in. The house could have been a heap of soft wood and broken glass by now, and she had prepared herself in the car for that possibility and decided she would sleep in the Volvo if she had to and figure the rest out in the morning. The house was standing. The porch sagged hard on the left side where a support post had rotted at the base. The white paint had gone the color of old teeth. 2 of the upstairs windows were broken, and the gutter on the east side hung loose and twisted away from the eaves like a bent arm. But the roof was intact. The chimney was intact. The walls were straight. Her grandfather had built this house in 1923, the way men of that generation built houses, with the assumption that their grandchildren would still be living in them, and the bones had held. 3 generations of bad weather, and the bones had held. The barn was a different conversation. She walked from the Volvo toward the back of the property and stood at the edge of the pasture and looked at it. The big dairy barn, the one her grandfather had built in 1925, the one her father had still been milking 22 cows in until Marjay was 14, was somewhere between standing and not standing. The east wall had buckled outward. The roof on the south side had caved in over what used to be the haymow, and there was a patch of sky visible through the collapse where there should have been red cedar shingle. The doors were gone. Whoever had stolen them a long time ago, because the door frame was already gray with weather. The whole structure listed about 4 degrees off true, the way an old man stands when one hip has gone out on him. She walked closer. The county had spray-painted an orange X on the front of the barn, and below it the words "scheduled for demolition" and a date in the spring. She put her hand on the wood beside the orange X. The board was soft under her fingers, the kind of soft that happens to wood that has been swelling and drying and swelling for decades. She pulled her hand back and brushed her palm against her jeans. She walked back to the Volvo. She got the key to the farmhouse out of her purse, the small brass key she had been carrying in her wallet for 30 years and had never used. She walked up the sagging porch steps, careful where she put her weight, and she put the key in the lock. The lock was stiff. She worked it patiently, the way her father had taught her to work things that had been sitting too long, with steady pressure and no force, and after a long moment the mechanism turned, and the door swung inward on hinges that screamed once and then gave. The smell of the house came out to meet her. Old cedar, old paper, the dried herbs her mother had hung above the kitchen door in the 80s and which were probably still there in some form, dust that had been settling for 30 years, and underneath all of it the specific smell of this house and no other. A smell she had not known she remembered until it was in her nose and behind her eyes, and her mouth was doing something she had not expected it to do. She set the suitcases down inside the front door. She stood in the front hall for a long time. Her father's wing chair was still beside the front window. The bookcase along the east wall was still full of the books he had collected slowly across his whole life. Hardbacks of agricultural reports and Steinbeck and one shelf of poetry he had never explained. The dust on everything lay thin and even. The house had not been ransacked. It had not been entered in 30 years by anyone who was not paying for it. It had simply been waiting. She walked through every room before she sat down. The kitchen, the back pantry, the small downstairs office her father had used to do the farm's books, the staircase, the 4 bedrooms on the second floor, her own old room with the iron bed frame still made up under a quilt her mother had stitched. She did not cry. She walked. She put her hand on door frames and on the kitchen counter and on the cold cast iron of the wood stove. She was greeting the house. The house was greeting her back. They had a lot to catch up on. She slept that first night in her childhood bedroom under the quilt her mother had stitched in 1968, with sheets she had brought from the trunk of the Volvo because the linen closet smelled too much like the years that had passed. She slept the way she had not slept in a long time. She woke at 6 the next morning with the kind of clean head that comes after the body has finally been allowed to set something down. and she stood at the window of the small upstairs room and watched the sun come up over the back pasture and the line of trees beyond it. She made coffee on the propane camp stove she had thought to pack at the last minute because she had assumed correctly that the gas line to the farmhouse stove would need testing before she trusted it. She drank the coffee at the kitchen table. She made a list. The list was 3 pages long by the time she had walked the whole house and the whole property a second time in daylight. The roof needed 2 sections of shingle replaced before snow. The east porch post needed pulling and resetting. The furnace would have to be tested by a person who knew what he was looking at, because she was not going to light a 60-year-old oil furnace on faith. The well pump was original. The septic was original. The kitchen plumbing made a sound when she turned on the cold tap that suggested air in the line and possibly worse. The 2 broken upstairs windows needed glass. The gutters needed clearing or replacing or both. The barn was its own category, and she set the barn aside on a separate page because the county's orange X meant a clock was running, and the clock was something she would have to address before April. She drove into the village of Cherry Valley at 9 because the village was the closest thing the county had to a hardware store, and because she had decided to begin where her father would have begun. The hardware store was on the corner of Main and Lancaster, in a building that had been a hardware store since at least the second Roosevelt. The bell over the door rang the way she remembered it ringing when she was 9 years old and her father had taken her in for a length of stovepipe. The man behind the counter was about her age, white hair, a flannel shirt over a t-shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked up at her over the top of the cash register and squinted. You wouldn't be Wendell Wentz, girl. She had not been called that in 30 years. Something inside her chest rearranged itself. I would be. I figured. You have his way of standing in a doorway. He came out from behind the counter and put out a square hand. Cyrus Pemberton. My father owned the store when your father was buying nails here. You came in once with him for stovepipe. You were maybe 9. I remember the stovepipe. I remember you. I'm sorry about your dad. I should have written. I figured you knew. I knew. She told him in short sentences what she needed. The roof, the porch, the furnace. He wrote the names of 3 men on the back of a receipt and slid it across the counter. The first name was Bert Carmichael, who Cyrus said was the man you wanted for anything that involved making something old hold up under another 50 winters. The second name was for a furnace technician in Cooperstown. The third was for a glazier who would come out for the broken windows without complaining about the drive. He did not charge her for the box of weather stripping or the 2 cans of penetrating oil she put on the counter. And when she tried to insist, he said her father had once helped his father get a stuck John Deere out of a creek in 1971, and that he was settling up. She drove home with the receipt in her pocket and a feeling in her chest she had not felt in a long time, which was the feeling of being known by name in a place that knew her before she had been Marjay Holcomb of Westport, when she had been Marjay Went of the Went farm, and the second name had not been smaller than the first. Bert Carmichael came out the next morning. He was 64, lean, slow-moving, with the careful handshake of a man who had broken a lot of fingers in the course of his work and respected the fingers of others. He walked the property with her for 2 hours. He did not talk much. When he did talk, what he said was useful. The porch was a 2-day job. The roof was a 1-week job if the weather held. The furnace he could not give an opinion on without the technician. The barn he stood in front of for a long time with his hands in the pockets of his canvas jacket, and then he turned to her and said, You got the orange X. I do. You want to fight the demo order. I do. It's fightable, barely. The county wants it down because nobody's been keeping it up. If you can show them you're keeping it up, you can buy time. A year, maybe 2. Past that, you're going to need to be putting real money in or letting it go. I will be putting real money in. He looked at her for a beat. He nodded once. He took the job. She called Camille on the 3rd night. Camille had been calling since Tuesday. Marjay had let the calls go because she had needed those 3 days to be the person she was in the farmhouse without the weight of being anyone's mother yet. When she finally picked up, Camille's voice on the line said only, Mom, I'm in Otsego. I'm at the farm. Tell me everything. She told her everything. The bank statements, the Greenwich apartment, the forged deeds, the Kettle Ridge letter, the drive up, the orange X on the barn. Camille listened the whole way through without interrupting, the way she had learned to listen from a man who was not her father. And when Marjay was done, Camille said, Tomas and I are coming this weekend. We'll bring tools. Bring warm clothes, too. The house has no heat yet. Mom? I'm all right. I'm better than all right. I want you to hear that in my voice. There was a pause on the line. Then Camille said, I hear it. Camille and Tomas came up on Saturday in their dusty Subaru with 2 sleeping bags, a cooler, a cordless drill, and the kind of determined energy that adult children bring to a parent who has just torn the foundation out of her own life and is rebuilding it on harder ground. Camille was 41 and looked like Marge at 41, which was a thing Marge had not been ready to see. Tomas was a high school history teacher in Albany with a quiet laugh and the patience of a man who had worked construction in his 20s to pay for college. They worked alongside her all weekend. They cleaned out the kitchen together. They washed the windows on the south side of the house. Tomas got down into the cellar with a flashlight and came back up with a careful report on the furnace that matched what Marge had already suspected, which was that it would have to be replaced before Christmas. On Sunday afternoon, Camille walked out to the barn with her. They stood in front of it together. The orange X looked larger up close than it had looked from the kitchen window. Camille put her hand on her mother's elbow. Grandpa milked cows in there. 22 of them. I was 8 years old, sitting on a stool watching him. What's behind the demo order? Can you save it? Burke says I can buy time. I want to buy time. I do not know yet what I want to do with the time. I just know I do not want to watch it come down. They walked back to the house at dusk. Camille and Tomas left after dinner with promises to come back in 2 weeks. Margie stood on the porch and watched the Subaru's taillights move down the gravel track and felt, for the first time in many years, the specific clean tiredness of a body that had spent the day on something it cared about. She started on the barn herself the next morning. Burke had not started his work on it yet. He was finishing the porch. The barn was hers to begin clearing because there were 60 years of accumulated equipment and hay rakes and broken stanchions and rusted milk cans inside. And somebody had to take a first pass before the structural work could begin. She put on her father's old canvas jacket, which still hung on the peg by the back door and still fit her, and she walked across the pasture in the cold morning with a wheelbarrow and a pair of work gloves and started. She worked for 3 days. She moved one item at a time. She sorted as she went into piles for keeping, for selling, for hauling to the dump. She found her grandfather's hand-forged hay hooks and set them aside. She found her father's milking stool with his initials burned into the underside and set it aside. She found a wooden crate of glass milk bottles with the Went Farm dairy label still legible on 6 of them, and her mouth went tight for a moment, and she set the crate aside. On the 4th morning, she was working in the back corner of the main floor, the section under the partial roof collapse, where the light came down through the broken shingle in long, dusty columns. She was clearing a stack of old fence posts away from what she had assumed was just the back wall of the barn, the long cedar wall that ran along the eastern edge of the structure. She moved the last of the fence posts. She stepped back. The boards on this section of wall were the wrong age. She did not see it right away. She saw it the way you see a face in a crowd that you almost recognize, a fraction of a second before your mind catches up to what you're looking at. The cedar planks on the rest of the back wall had the same gray weathering, the same warp pattern, the same nail-head spacing. This one section, about 8 feet wide, was made of cedar that was darker, less weathered, and nailed with a different gauge of nail. The mortar in the stone foundation behind it was a different age. The floorboard in front of it had been replaced, and the replacement board had been laid down at a slightly different angle than the originals. She stood very still. She walked to the toolbox she had carried out from the farmhouse pantry and took out a flat pry bar. She walked back to the wall. She put the tip of the pry bar into the seam between 2 of the cedar planks and worked it slowly, the way her father had worked things, with patient pressure and no force. The first plank came off in her hand. Behind it was darkness. She could feel cool air moving from the dark space onto her face. She pulled off the second plank and the third. The opening was about 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall by the time she had taken 6 planks off, and she stepped back and got the work lantern from the toolbox and turned it on and held it up. It was a room. It was a room about 10 feet deep and 12 feet wide, framed inside the back of the barn, the way a hidden chamber is framed inside the back of a much larger building. The walls were smooth pine, painted a pale color she could not name in the lantern light. The floor was cedar plank, sealed and clean. There was a workbench along one wall. There were stretched canvases stacked along another wall, dozens of them, leaning carefully against each other in the way a careful person stacks paintings he means to come back to. She stepped through the opening. She lifted the lantern. The painting on the easel in the center of the room was of her. She was 12 in the painting. She was sitting on the porch of the farmhouse with her knees pulled up, reading a book, in the summer dress her mother had made her in the summer of 1965. The light in the painting was the light of late afternoon. The way her hair fell over her shoulder was the way her hair had fallen when she was 12. She had not seen this scene in 60 years. She had not known anyone else had seen it. She set the lantern down on the workbench because her hand was shaking. She turned the next canvas toward her. She was 16, standing in the orchard in November, holding an apple. The next canvas was her at 21, in a graduation gown. The photograph from the Cornell graduation she remembered her father had not been able to attend because of a flooding crisis at the farm. The next was her wedding day from a distance, viewed from outside the church, where her father had stood in the cold and watched the doors close behind her because Russell had asked him not to come inside. There were 40 paintings. Her father had been painting her every year of her life. She sat down on the cedar floor. She put her face in her hands. The sound that came out of her was not a sound she had made before in her life, and it went on for a long time. And the only thing in the room that heard it was the lantern and the 40 paintings of a daughter a quiet man had loved across half a century from the silence he had been required to live in. She sat on the cedar floor for a long time. The lantern threw a steady, warm light across the room. The paintings stood where her father had left them, leaning patient against the pine wall, the way he stacked anything he meant to return to. When she could stand again, she stood. She walked the perimeter of the small room slowly. The workbench had his tools on it, his brushes in a clay jar he had thrown himself on the wheel he kept in the basement of the farmhouse, his palette knives, a row of small jars of pigment with handwritten labels in his slanted handwriting, a wooden box of charcoal sticks. Above the workbench, on a shelf at eye level, was a tin biscuit box with a faded picture of a Scottish terrier on the lid. She took the box down. She sat on the workbench stool and opened it on her lap. The first item inside was a stack of letters tied with a piece of garden twine. There were a lot of them. She loosened the twine and looked at the top envelope. It was addressed to her in his handwriting at her address in Westport. There was no stamp. The envelope had never been mailed. She turned it over. The next envelope was the same. The next. She thumbed through the stack. They were dated, in the upper right corner of each envelope, every Sunday for 30 years. He had written her a letter every Sunday from the year she got married until the week before he died. She did not read them yet. She could not read them yet. She set the stack of letters back in the tin and looked at what was beneath them. A second smaller stack of correspondence, this one in business envelopes, addressed to her father from a gallery on West 24th Street in Manhattan called the Halsey Brennan Gallery. She read the top letter. It was from a man named Peter Halsey Brennan, dated 1989, and it began with the line, "Dear Mr. Went, the slides you sent have been with me for 2 weeks and I cannot stop returning to them." She read the rest of the letter. The gallery had wanted to represent her father's work. They had wanted to mount a show. He had written back declining, and Halsey Brennan had written again, and her father had declined again. And the correspondence had continued across nearly a decade, the gallery offering and her father quietly refusing, until the last letter in the stack from 1993, the year before he died, in which Halsey Brennan had written, "Wendell, I will stop asking, but I want you to know that when you are ready, or when whoever inherits this work is ready, the door of this gallery is open to it. The work deserves to be seen." She set the letters down on the workbench. Beneath the gallery correspondence, at the bottom of the tin, was a small key and a folded piece of paper. The paper was a bank statement from the First National Bank of Cooperstown, dated 3 weeks before her father's death, for an account in the name of Went Farm Trust, beneficiary Marjorie Ann Went. The balance was significant. Not the size of the Kettle Ridge offer, but enough. She read the figure. She read it again. She folded the paper back along its original creases. The key was for a safe deposit box at the same bank. She drove into Cooperstown the next morning. The teller who took her to the safe deposit room was about 30 and had no idea that she was walking a woman whose father had been waiting on her for 3 decades. The box held 3 things: the original deed to the Went farm, in her name only, certified and recorded; the original deed to the adjacent 40 acres, also in her name only, also certified, also recorded, with a date of purchase in 1991 and a notation in her father's handwriting that the parcel had been bought, with the intention that it never leave the family, and a sealed envelope with her name on it. She did not open the envelope at the bank. She took the contents home, set them on her father's kitchen table, made a pot of coffee, and sat down with the envelope in front of her for a long time before she opened it. When she opened it, what she found inside was a single sheet of paper in his handwriting dated the same day as the bank statement. Margie, if you are reading this, then either I lived long enough to give it to you myself, or you have come back to the farm and found what I left for you. I hope it is the first. I am writing it, assuming the second. I have known about Russell for a long time. I will not put on this page what I know, because what I know is for you to find on your own when the time is right, and I trust that the time will come right. I will only say this. He has been working for many years on getting his hands on this farm. He has not succeeded because I made certain he could not. The deeds are in your name only. The trust account is in your name only. The 40 acres are in your name only. He cannot touch any of it without you signing it over, and I do not believe you will sign it over once you understand what he has done. The paintings in the back of the barn are yours. The gallery in Manhattan wanted to show them. I said no while I was alive because the work was for me and for you, not for strangers. Now that I am gone, the decision is yours. If you want them seen, send them. If you want to keep them, keep them. Either way, they were always for you. I love you, Margie. I always loved you. Quietly was the only way I knew how. Dad. She read it twice. She called Naomi Quinn. Naomi listened to the inventory of what Margie had found, and at the end of it, Naomi said, Marjorie, I want you to understand what is now in front of us. The forged deeds your husband filed are not just fraud. They are fraud committed against property he had no path to acquire, because the actual title and the actual financial instrument were locked down by your father in your sole name a year before he died. Your husband has been operating against a wall he could not see. Every step he has taken for 15 years has been into that wall. I understand. I am going to file the criminal referral this week. I'm going to write to Kettle Ridge Holdings to inform them that any negotiation they have been conducting has been conducted with a party who has no authority to convey title. The Halsey Brennan Gallery I will leave to you because that is not a legal matter. That is a decision. I will think about the gallery. Take your time on that one. The other matters do not need your attention. They will move on their own now. She hung up. She walked back out to the barn at dusk. She stood inside the small room behind the back wall and looked at the paintings of herself across half a century. And she thought about the shape of the love that had made them and about what she was going to do with it next. 6 months passed. The porch was rebuilt by November. Burke and his nephew put a new roof on the south side of the farmhouse before the first snow, and the furnace technician from Cooperstown got the old oil furnace through one more winter on the condition that Margie would replace it in the spring, which he agreed to and budgeted for and did. The barn was a longer project. Burke wrapped the structure in temporary bracing before the first hard freeze propped the east wall back toward True with a system of cabled supports and tarped the south roof so the snow would not finish what the rot had started. The county accepted the bracing as evidence of active restoration and pulled the demolition order in December. She paid Burke that month and shook his hand and told him that they would start on the real barn work in April. Camille and Tomas came up every other weekend. They brought tools, food, friends from Albany, who knew how to strip wallpaper or rewire an outlet or split firewood. The farmhouse came back, room by room, the way a body comes back after a long illness, slowly and with a kind of internal cooperation that Margie could feel happening, even when she was not actively working on it. She wrote to Peter Halsey Brennan in January. She enclosed photographs of 9 of the 40 paintings, taken in good window light by Tomas, who had a steady hand with a camera. She did not say much in the letter. She wrote that her father had been Wendell Wendt, that he had passed in 1994, that the paintings he had refused to send during his life were now in her possession, and that if the gallery's interest had outlasted the long silence, she was willing to discuss a posthumous exhibition. She mailed the letter on a Tuesday and assumed it might take weeks for a response. Halsey Brennan called the farmhouse on Thursday morning. He was 81 years old. His voice was thin but clear. He said that he had been the one who made the trip up to Otsego County in 1989 to see the work in person, that he had known her father for the brief time their correspondence overlapped, and that not a year had passed in 3 decades when he had not wondered what had happened to those paintings. He said the gallery would be honored to mount the show. He asked when she could come to New York to begin the conversation. She drove down on the first weekend of February. They spent 4 hours in the gallery's back room with the photographs spread across a long oak table, and by the end of the afternoon, the show had a date in it, the second weekend of October, and a working title her father would have approved of, which was simply Wendell Went, A Life of Looking. The fraud case moved on its own clock. Naomi sent her short updates by mail. The criminal referral had been accepted. The forged deeds had been pulled and voided. Kettle Ridge Holdings had withdrawn from the project the week after Naomi's letter reached their attorneys, and a forensic accounting of Russell's affairs had begun in earnest, conducted by a firm in White Plains that specialized in this kind of work. Margie read each update once and filed it. She did not return to it. The case was running, and her job now was to live in the place she was living in. He arrived on a Saturday afternoon in late March. She saw the car from the kitchen window, a gray sedan she did not recognize, a rental, which told her something before he had stepped out of it. He had always driven a Lexus that he replaced on a 3-year cycle. The rental meant the lease had ended and not been renewed. He got out of the driver's seat slowly, the way a man gets out of a car when his back has started to hurt him in a way it did not used to hurt. And he stood in the gravel and looked at the house for a long moment before he started toward the porch. She put her coffee cup down. She walked to the front door. She stepped out onto the porch she had restored, and she closed the door behind her because she did not want him inside the house. She wanted the conversation to happen in the cold spring air, on the boards Burke had milled from cedar he and Margie had selected together in November. Margie, he said. He looked smaller. He had lost weight in the wrong way, the way men lose weight when something has been working on them from the inside. The coat he was wearing was a coat she remembered from 10 years ago. He had not bought a new coat in a long time, Russell, can we talk? You can talk. I'm listening. He talked for about 15 minutes. He talked about pressure. He talked about a difficult period he had been going through. He talked about decisions he had made under stress that he now regretted. He used the word mistakes twice. He did not name the second family. He did not name the forged deeds. He did not name the Greenwich apartment or the Kettle Ridge letter. He arrived eventually at the reason he had driven 7 hours in a rental car to stand on her porch, which was that he wanted her to call Naomi off. He wanted her to ask the prosecutor for leniency. He wanted her to step in. She let him finish. She went inside without saying anything. She came back out with a manila folder. She handed it to him. This is everything. Naomi prepared it. You can read it on the drive home. He did not open it. He held it at his side. I want you to understand something, she said. I am not doing any of this to hurt you. I am doing it because what you did is what the record shows, and the record is going to stand. You took a long time deciding what I needed to know about my own life. I have decided what you need to know about yours. The deeds were forged. The accounts were hidden. The farm was never going to be yours. My father saw to that before he died. He saw you clearly, and I did not. And the work I am doing now is the work of catching up to what he already knew. Margie. I am not finished. You spent 50 years using my trust as a tool against me. I am not going to spend the rest of my life being angry at you for it, because the rest of my life is not yours to take any more of. But I am also not going to step in. What happens to you now is yours to carry. It always was. I am only just letting you carry it. He stood on the bottom step holding the folder. I think you should go, she said. He went. The gallery show opened on the second Saturday of October in a long, narrow room on West 24th Street with white walls and good northern light. A year and 1 month after the morning Margie had bent down in her own office in Westport to pick up a folder that had fallen off her husband's desk. 40 paintings hung on the walls. Halsey Brennan had organized them chronologically. The earliest canvas was of Margie at 5 years old, sitting on the back step of the farmhouse with a tin cup in her hand. The latest was of her at 68, walking through the orchard in autumn, painted from a photograph her father had taken in secret on a visit she had made to him in the last spring of his life. Camille came down with Tomas. Cyrus Pemberton drove all the way from Cherry Valley with his wife. Bert Carmichael came in his only suit and stood in front of the painting of the barn, the one her father had done in 1972, when the cedar planks had still been red and the roof had still been straight. Estelle Faraday from the library brought 3 of her sisters. Roy Tannenbaum, the neighbor whose pasture ran along the southern edge of the Ventland, came in clean boots and a tie his wife had picked out, and he stood for a long time in front of the painting of a Holstein cow her father had done in 1968. Halsey Brennan gave the opening remarks. He spoke for about 4 minutes. He said that he had spent 50 years showing work by artists who wanted to be seen, and that what he was hanging on his walls tonight was the work of an artist who had not wanted to be seen, who had made the work for one viewer only, and who had trusted that when the time was right, the viewer would arrive. He said that the viewer had arrived. He raised a glass to Wendell Went. The room raised glasses with him. Margie stood near the back during the toast. She had been given a small speech to make if she wanted to make one. She had not decided yet whether she would. When the time came, she walked up to the small podium at the front of the room, and she looked across at the wall of paintings of herself at every age she had been, and she set her notes down on the podium without looking at them. "My father was a quiet man," she said. "He did not talk about what he loved. He showed it, and the showing was the only language he had. For 30 years after I married, I did not know that he was painting me. I lived in a house 7 hours south of the farm where these paintings were being made, and the man I lived with had arranged my life so that I would not come back to this farm, and I went along with the arrangement because I did not see it for what it was. My father saw it. He kept painting anyway. He kept writing me letters he never mailed because the act of writing them was its own answer, even if I never read them in his lifetime. I have read them now. I have read every one. What I want to say tonight is that the love that does its work in silence, the love that does not ask to be acknowledged, the love that simply continues, is the love that survives the betrayal of louder loves. My father knew that. He banked on it. He was right. She did not say anything else. She stepped down from the podium. The room was quiet for about a beat, and then Camille started to clap, and the rest of the room joined her, and Margie walked back to where she had been standing and let her daughter put an arm around her shoulders. The fraud case concluded the following March. The penalties were what Naomi had said they would likely be. A judgment that would take Russell the rest of his working life to satisfy. A criminal record. The forensic accounting closed his remaining accounts. The Greenwich woman had left him within 4 months of the divorce filing, as Margie had assumed she would. The school in Greenwich had been quietly informed. The apartment had been given up. Russell was, by the time the case closed, living in a 1-bedroom rental in a part of New Jersey Margie did not know the name of. She read Naomi's final summary letter once, filed it, and did not return to it. The 40-acre parcel her father had bought in 1991 turned out to contain the headwaters of the creek that fed the Vent farm pond. She left it untouched. She enrolled the parcel in a conservation easement program because the parcel had not been bought for development, and because her father's note had said that it was meant to never leave the family, and the easement was the surest way to honor that across the next 100 years. The paintings sold over the following year, the ones Margie was willing to let go. She kept the painting of herself at 12 on the porch. She kept the painting of the barn. She kept the painting of her mother in the orchard, the one her father had done in 1962, the year before her mother died. The rest went to careful buyers Halsey Brennan vetted personally, and the proceeds went into the farm account and then into the slow good work of putting the place fully back together. Burke and his nephew started on the barn in April. By August, the east wall was true again, and by October, the roof had new red cedar shingle on it. And by the following spring, the Vent barn looked the way it had looked in 1968, except for a small bronze plaque set into the stone of the foundation, which Margie had asked Burke to install on a Tuesday morning in May. The plaque said only, "For Wendell Went, who loved this farm into the next generation." She was 71 years old. She was sitting at her father's kitchen table with a cup of coffee on a morning in late September, a year and a half after the morning a folder had fallen off Russell's desk, and the light coming through the kitchen window was the same light that had come through that window every morning of her father's life, and she understood, in the way you understand a thing only after you have lived your way into it, that the love that had built the farm and protected the farm and waited at the farm for her to come home had been the only love in her life that had ever asked for nothing. It had simply continued. It had simply held. And she had finally arrived where it had been waiting. If you have ever discovered that the foundation you built your life on was not what you believed it to be, this story belongs to you. Marjorie Holcomb did not survive her husband's betrayal. She outlasted it. And there is a difference. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the love that is waiting for them, the love that was given to them quietly by a parent or a grandparent or their own quiet knowing, is still waiting, still solid, still ready to be received the moment they are ready to receive it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.